Welcome to HFY Stories. If you're ready for jaw-dropping stories and a universe full of excitement, hit that subscribe button like it's the big red button in a space opera. Give us a like if you're feeling that interstellar vibe, and comment below to join the conversation. The calm before the storm. The Galactic Council, a body formed by the most advanced species in the universe, had long held the belief that humanity was a minor player on the interstellar stage. Humans, despite their rapid technological advancements, were considered too primitive, too emotional, too unpredictable to be of any real consequence. The Council saw them as a curiosity, a species that had risen quickly but was destined to remain in the shadows of the more established races. They tolerated humanity's presence, occasionally trading with them, but mostly ignoring their ambitions. Earth, however, was no longer the quaint blue planet it once was. After years of interstellar exploration, humanity had grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. They had formed alliances, built powerful ships, and developed technologies that rivaled even the most advanced civilizations. Yet the Galactic Council continued to overlook them, dismissing humanity's potential. Captain Elena Vasquez, a seasoned officer in the United Earth Fleet, was one of the few who understood the gravity of the situation. She had seen the contempt in the eyes of the council members during diplomatic meetings, the way they looked down on her and her crew. But Elena knew better. She knew that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its numbers, but its indomitable spirit, the ability to rise above any challenge, no matter how insurmountable. One day, as Elena was preparing her ship, the Arcadia, for a routine patrol near the borders of human space, she received an encrypted message. It was from an old friend, Admiral Jonas Keller, a man known for his strategic brilliance and unyielding loyalty to Earth. The message was brief but clear. The Council plans to eliminate us. We must act now. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She had always suspected that the Council might one day see humanity as a threat, but to hear it confirmed by Keller was chilling. The Council had grown increasingly wary of humanity's rapid advancement, and it seemed they had finally decided to put an end to it. Elena knew that if the Council decided to act, it would be swift and merciless. Humanity would have no chance unless they struck first. But how could they fight against the combined might of the Galactic Council? The thought alone was terrifying. The Council had fleets that could blot out the stars, weapons that could tear planets apart, and soldiers that were bred for war. Humanity was strong, but they were still young, still learning. Could they really stand up to the most powerful forces in the galaxy? Elena knew she didn't have much time. She called an emergency meeting with her crew, explaining the situation as best she could. The room was filled with tension as the reality of the situation sank in. They were being asked to defy the most powerful beings in the universe, to stand up against an enemy that vastly outnumbered and outgunned them. It seemed like a suicide mission. But as Elena looked around the room, she saw something else in the eyes of her crew: determination. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had always come out on top. This was no different. They were not just fighting for themselves, but for their families, their friends, and for the future of humanity. If the Council wanted a fight, they would give them one. "We're not just going to survive this," Elena said, her voice steady and strong. "We're going to show them what it means to be human. We're going to remind them why they should never underestimate us." With that, the crew of the Arcadia began their preparations. They knew they couldn't win in a straight-up fight, so they would have to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than their enemies. They would use every trick in the book, every piece of technology they had, and every ounce of courage in their hearts. This was not just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of humanity. As the Arcadia left Earth's orbit, Elena couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. They were just one ship, but they carried the hopes of an entire species. They would not back down, and they would not go quietly into the night. The Council had forgotten humanity's power, but they were about to be reminded, and this time humanity would not be ignored. The ambush. The Arcadia soared through the blackness of space, its engines humming with barely contained energy. Elena and her crew knew that they were heading into the lion's den, but there was no turning back now. The plan was simple, yet audacious: strike at the heart of the Council before they could move against Earth. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. As they neared the border of human-controlled space, the crew prepared for battle. Weapon systems were checked and rechecked. Shields were brought online, and every member of the crew took their position, ready for whatever lay ahead. The tension in the air was palpable, but so was the determination. They had trained for this moment, and they would not falter. Elena stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the view screen. Ahead of them, the stars twinkled innocently, unaware of the violence that was about to erupt. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. They had one chance to make this work, and failure was not an option. "Captain, we're approaching the target," said Lieutenant Harris, the ship's navigator. His voice was calm, but Elena could hear the underlying tension. "Bring us out of warp," Elena ordered, "and raise the cloaking field." The Arcadia dropped out of warp, its massive engines powering down as the ship slipped into stealth mode. The cloaking field hummed to life, wrapping the ship in a bubble of invisibility. To any sensors, they would appear as nothing more than a faint echo, easily dismissed as background noise. "Cloaking field is stable," reported Ensign Lee, the ship's tactical officer. "We're invisible to their sensors." Elena nodded, her mind racing. They were now deep in Council territory, dangerously close to one of their primary fleets. If they were detected, it would be over in seconds. But if they could strike first, they might just have a chance. "Target the lead ship," Elena ordered. "We need to take out their command and control before they can react." The Arcadia's weapons locked onto the massive dreadnought at the center of the Council fleet. It was a behemoth, bristling with weapons and heavily armored. But even the strongest armor had its weak points, and Elena was determined to exploit them. "Fire at will," Elena commanded. The Arcadia unleashed a barrage of torpedoes and laser fire, all aimed at the dreadnought's vulnerable spots. The first wave of torpedoes hit their mark, detonating with devastating force. The dreadnought's shields flared brightly, struggling to absorb the impact. But the Arcadia was relentless, pouring on the firepower with precision and intensity. Within moments, the dreadnought's shields collapsed, and the second wave of torpedoes struck the ship's hull. Explosions rippled along the length of the massive vessel, tearing through its armor and sending debris flying into space. The dreadnought's engines sputtered and died, leaving it adrift and powerless. The rest of the Council fleet was caught off guard. They scrambled to respond, but without their command ship, their coordination was a mess. The Arcadia took full advantage, picking off smaller ships one by one, using hit-and-run tactics to keep the enemy off balance. But the Council fleet was massive, and despite their early success, the Arcadia's luck was running out. The enemy ships began to regroup, their weapons locking onto the Arcadia. Elena knew they couldn't keep this up forever. They needed to finish this quickly or they would be overwhelmed. "Prepare for a tactical retreat," Elena ordered. "We've done enough damage. Let's get out of here before they regroup." The Arcadia's engines roared to life as the ship turned to flee. But just as they were about to jump to warp, a warning siren blared across the bridge. "Captain, we've got incoming!" shouted Ensign Lee. "It's a..." The ship rocked violently as a massive energy beam struck their port side, tearing through the hull and sending shockwaves through the ship. The crew was thrown from their seats as the lights flickered and alarms blared. Elena struggled to regain her footing, her mind racing. They had been hit and hit hard. The ship's systems were failing, and they were surrounded by enemies. But she couldn't give up now. Not when they were so close. "Damage report!" she barked, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "Hull breach on decks 5 and 6, reported Lieutenant Harris, his voice strained. "Shields are down to 20%, and we've lost one of our main engines." Elena's mind raced. They were in serious trouble, but they still had one last trick up their sleeve. It was risky, but it was their only shot at survival. "Activate the warp core overload," Elena ordered. "Set it to detonate in 30 seconds. The crew hesitated, stunned by the order. A warp core overload would turn the Arcadia into a massive bomb, capable of destroying anything within 100 kilometers. It was a desperate move, but it might just be enough to take out the remaining Council ships and give them a chance to escape. "Captain, are you sure?" asked Lieutenant Harris, his voice trembling. "I'm sure," Elena replied, her voice firm. "Do it." The crew sprang into action, their hands moving swiftly across the controls. The warp core began to hum ominously as it prepared to go critical. Elena could feel the tension in the air. The fear and uncertainty, but also the determination. They were not going to go down without a fight. "Warp core overload activated," reported Ensign Lee. "Countdown initiated. 30 seconds to detonation." Elena took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The Council ships were closing in, their weapons locked on the Arcadia. But they had no idea what was coming. "Brace for impact," Elena ordered, "and may humanity forgive us." As the seconds ticked down, the Arcadia's engines roared to life one last time. The ship surged forward, straight towards the heart of the Council fleet. The enemy ships tried to scatter, but it was too late. The Arcadia plowed through their formation, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the Arcadia's warp core detonated. The explosion was cataclysmic, a massive fireball that consumed everything in its path. Council ships were torn apart, their hulls shattered by the sheer force of the blast. The shockwave rippled through space, sending debris flying in all directions. As the light faded, the battlefield was silent. The Arcadia was gone, along with most of the Council fleet. But humanity had struck a blow, one that the Council would not soon forget. They had shown their strength, their resolve, and their willingness to do whatever it took to survive. But the war was far from over, and the true test was yet to come. The trap unveiled. The debris of the Arcadia floated silently in space, the wreckage a grim testament to the ferocity of the battle. The once proud ship, now nothing more than twisted metal and charred remains, had given its all in a final act of defiance. But as the dust settled, something remarkable happened. A small, sleek escape pod emerged from the wreckage, its engines flickering to life. Inside the pod, Captain Elena Vasquez and a handful of her crew members struggled to catch their breath. The explosion had knocked them around, and the shock of narrowly escaping death was still fresh in their minds. But they were alive, and that was all that mattered. "Is everyone okay?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse from the smoke that had filled the pod. There were groans of pain and murmurs of assent from her crew. They were battered and bruised, but they had survived. Elena allowed herself a moment of relief before her mind snapped back to the task at hand. "Status report," she demanded, her tone sharp and focused. Lieutenant Harris, who was nursing a cut on his forehead, checked the pod's systems. "We're in bad shape, Captain. The pod's life support is functional, but we've got limited power, and our communications are down. We won't be able to send a distress signal." Elena cursed under her breath. They were stranded in enemy territory with no way to call for help, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. There had to be a way out of this. "What about the Council fleet?" she asked. "Are there any ships still operational?" Harris checked the sensors, which were barely functioning. "Most of the fleet is gone, but I'm picking up some faint signals. Looks like a few ships survived the explosion. They're damaged, but they're still in the fight." Elena's mind raced. The Arcadia had dealt a devastating blow, but the Council wasn't finished yet. They would be hunting for survivors, and it was only a matter of time before they found the escape pod. They needed a plan, and fast. "All right, listen up," Elena said, her voice commanding attention. "We're not out of this yet. If we can find one of those damaged Council ships, we might be able to commandeer it and get out of here. It's risky, but it's our best shot." The crew nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had already defied the odds by surviving the explosion. What was one more impossible mission? "Lieutenant Harris, set a course for the nearest Council ship," Elena ordered, "and keep us on low power. We don't want to attract any unwanted attention." The escape pod's engines sputtered to life, propelling them slowly towards the wreckage of a nearby Council cruiser. The ship was heavily damaged, its hull breached in multiple places, but it was still intact. If they could get on board and take control, they might just be able to escape. As they approached the cruiser, Elena's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment that would decide their fate. She signaled for the crew to prepare for boarding, and they armed themselves with whatever weapons they had managed to salvage from the Arcadia. The pod docked with the cruiser's airlock, and the crew braced themselves. The door hissed open, and they were met with the eerie silence of the damaged ship. The corridors were dark, lit only by flickering emergency lights. The air was thick with the smell of burning electronics and leaking coolant. "Stay alert," Elena whispered as they moved cautiously through the ship. "We don't know what we're walking into." They made their way through the twisted, ruined corridors, their senses on high alert. The ship appeared deserted, but Elena knew better than to let her guard down. The Council was known for its cunning, and they wouldn't leave a ship like this unprotected. As they reached the command center, Elena signaled for the crew to spread out and cover the entrances. She approached the control console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she tried to bring the ship's systems online. Suddenly, the lights in the room flared to life, and alarms began blaring. Elena's heart sank as she realized they had triggered a trap. The door behind them slammed shut, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors. "Get ready!" Elena shouted, raising her weapon. "We're not going down without a fight!" The crew took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the door. They could hear the sound of enemy soldiers approaching, their heavy boots thudding against the metal floor. Elena's pulse raced as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The door burst open and a squad of council soldiers stormed into the room. They were clad in sleek black armor, their visors glowing ominously. The battle was on in an instant, the air filled with the sound of gunfire and the clash of metal. Elena and her crew fought with everything they had, their determination unwavering. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched, but they refused to give up. This was their last stand, and they would make the council pay for every inch of ground they took. The fight was brutal, and the room was quickly filled with the smell of ozone and the sight of sparks flying as energy blasts ricocheted off the walls. Elena's crew fought valiantly, taking down several of the council soldiers, but the enemy was relentless. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a deafening explosion rocked the ship. The floor beneath them shook violently, and the walls cracked as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. The council soldiers hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance. "Now's our chance!" Elena shouted. "We need to get to the escape pods." The crew didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled towards the nearest exit, fighting their way through the remaining soldiers as the ship continued to break apart around them. Elena could feel the heat rising as fires broke out, the flames licking at their heels as they ran. They reached the escape pod bay just as the ship began to buckle. The pods were still intact, but the controls were damaged. Elena didn't waste any time. She grabbed a crowbar and pried open the nearest pod, shoving her crew inside. "Hurry!" she yelled, her voice barely audible over the roar of the collapsing ship. The last of her crew piled into the pod, and Elena slammed the door shut behind them. She activated the launch sequence manually, the pod's engines sputtering to life just as the ship's hull began to rupture. The pod shot out into space, narrowly avoiding the explosion as the cruiser was torn apart. As they drifted away from the wreckage, Elena allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. They had escaped, but only just, and they were still deep in enemy territory, with no way to call for help. But as she looked around at her crew, bruised, battered, but alive, she knew that they weren't done fighting. They had survived this far, and they would keep going no matter what the council threw at them. They would find a way home, because humanity wasn't just a collection of individuals. It was an idea, a belief that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come. And as long as there were humans left to fight, the council would never truly win. The final stand. The escape pod floated silently through the void, its passengers bruised and weary but unbroken. Captain Elena Vasquez, her eyes burning with determination, watched the stars pass by, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. They were stranded, deep in enemy territory with no way to call for help, but she refused to give up. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but they weren't beaten yet, and as long as she had breath in her body, she would keep fighting. The pod's systems were barely functional, but they had managed to plot a course towards the nearest human outpost. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Elena knew that the council wouldn't give up the chase easily. They would hunt them down, relentless and unforgiving. But she was prepared to make her last stand, to show the galaxy that humanity was not to be trifled with. "Captain, we're picking up something on the sensors," said Lieutenant Harris, his voice tense. "It's faint, but it looks like a council ship. It's heading straight for us." Elena's heart sank. They were out of time. The council had found them, and there was no way they could outrun a fully armed warship in their damaged escape pod. But she refused to let despair take hold. There had to be a way out of this, there always was. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice steely. "We're not going down without a fight." The crew braced themselves as the pod's engines sputtered to life, struggling to push the small craft to its limits. But it was clear they were outmatched. The council ship was closing in fast, its weapons systems locking onto the pod with deadly precision. "Captain, we're not going to make it," said Ensign Lee, his voice laced with fear. "They'll be on us in minutes." Elena clenched her fists, her mind racing. They were out of options, but she refused to let that be the end of their story. If they were going to go down, they would do it on their terms. They would make the Council pay for every life they took. "Activate the pod's self-destruct sequence," Elena ordered, her voice calm but resolute. "We'll take them with us." The crew exchanged shocked glances, but there was no time for hesitation. They had followed Elena this far, and they trusted her judgment. Ensign Lee quickly keyed in the command, the pod's systems beeping in confirmation. "Self-destruct sequence activated," Lee reported, his voice trembling. Countdown initiated. 5 minutes to detonation. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the view screen. The Council ship loomed closer, its weapons bristling with lethal energy. They were out of time, but she felt a strange sense of peace. They had fought with everything they had, and they had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of. That was enough. But just as the Council ship closed to firing range, something unexpected happened. A massive energy surge rippled through the void, knocking the pod off course and sending the Council ship spiraling. The view screen flickered and then went dark. "What the hell was that?" Lieutenant Harris exclaimed, his voice filled with shock and confusion. Elena struggled to regain her footing as the pod's systems struggled to compensate for the sudden shockwave. She had no idea what had just happened, but she wasn't about to waste the opportunity. "Reset the course," she ordered. "We need to—" But before she could finish her sentence, the view screen flickered back to life, revealing a sight that took her breath away. Emerging from the darkness of space was a massive fleet. Hundreds of ships, all bearing the insignia of the United Earth Fleet. At the center of the formation was the flagship, the Elysium, its sleek hull gleaming in the starlight. "Captain, it's the fleet!" Harris shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "They found us!" Elena's heart soared as she watched the Elysium power up its weapons, its energy cannons trained on the Council ship that had been pursuing them. With a single, devastating volley, the Elysium obliterated the enemy ship, reducing it to a cloud of debris in an instant. Cheers erupted in the escape pod as the reality of their rescue sank in. They had done it. They had survived against all odds, and the fleet had arrived just in time to save them. Elena allowed herself a rare smile as she watched the Elysium maneuver to dock with their pod. But as the rescue team boarded the pod and helped the crew to safety, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over yet. The Council had been dealt a severe blow, but they were far from defeated, and she knew that the war was only beginning. As she stepped onto the deck of the Elysium, Elena was greeted by Admiral Jonas Keller, his face lined with worry but filled with pride. "You did well, Captain," he said, his voice gruff but warm. "You showed the Council that humanity isn't to be underestimated." Elena nodded, her expression serious. "We survived, Admiral, but the Council won't stop here. They'll come after us with everything they have." Keller's eyes hardened. "Let them come," he replied. "We'll be ready, and we'll remind them once again why humanity is a force to be reckoned with." As the fleet prepared for the next phase of the war, Elena couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. They had survived the impossible, and they had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be trifled with. But the fight was far from over. The Council had made a grave mistake in underestimating them, and they would pay the price. Because humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future. And they would stop at nothing to ensure that future was theirs. The price of victory. The fleet moved through space with a purpose, its ships sleek and deadly, their weapons systems humming with barely contained energy. The United Earth Fleet had taken the fight to the Galactic Council, striking deep into enemy territory with a ferocity that had taken even the most seasoned Council commanders by surprise. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Elysium, her eyes fixed on the view screen as they approached the Council's capital world. The Elysium hung in space, battered but unbroken. Captain Elena Vasquez surveyed the scene from the bridge, her eyes scanning the damaged but still operational fleet around her. The final battle with the Galactic Council had been fierce and unforgiving, but humanity had endured. Now, as the remnants of the Council fleet scattered, Elena was ready to lead her crew to the end game of this grueling conflict. "Captain, we have multiple contacts incoming," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice tense. "Looks like a final push from the Council." Elena nodded, her expression hardening. The Council had regrouped for one last desperate stand, determined to crush humanity's advance. She knew this battle would be the ultimate test of their resolve. Prepare all weapon systems and coordinate with the fleet. We're going to finish this. The Elysium's engines roared to life as it surged forward, leading the charge into the heart of the Council's remaining forces. The ships around them moved in perfect synchronization, a testament to the unity and discipline of the United Earth Fleet. The enemy was formidable, but the humans had a fighting spirit that was not to be underestimated. The battle commenced with a deafening roar. Energy beams and missiles streaked across the void, lighting up the darkness with flashes of fiery destruction. The Council fleet was relentless, their ships moving with a precision and ruthlessness that spoke of their desperation. The humans responded with equal ferocity, their weapons blazing as they cut through the enemy ranks. Elena's hands flew over the controls, issuing commands and coordinating the fleet's maneuvers. The Elysium was hit several times, the ship shaking violently with each impact. Alarms blared and damage reports came in rapid succession, detailing breaches in the hull and failures in critical systems. "Damage report!" Elena shouted over the chaos. "Shields are at 30%!" Harris replied, his voice strained. "Weapon systems are partially offline on the starboard side. We're taking heavy fire." Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing as she assessed their situation. The Council fleet was formidable, but they had come too far to falter now. Divert all power to the forward shields and reinforce the starboard side. "We're going to push through their lines." The Elysium surged forward, its engines straining as it moved through the maelstrom of battle. The ship's remaining weapon systems fired in a desperate bid to clear a path, their energy beams cutting through the enemy ships with brutal efficiency. As they pressed on, Elena could see the Council's flagship, a massive, imposing vessel at the center of the enemy formation. Taking it down would be the key to breaking the Council's will. She issued orders to concentrate fire on the flagship, the Elysium's weapons blazing as they targeted the enemy vessel. The flagship retaliated with fierce intensity, its weapons unleashing a torrent of energy that battered the Elysium's already damaged shields. The ship shook violently with each hit, the crew bracing themselves for the impact. "Captain, we've got multiple incoming missiles targeting the Elysium," Ensign Lee reported, his voice urgent. "They're closing in fast!" Elena's heart raced as she realized the danger. The Elysium's defenses were already compromised, and a direct hit from those missiles could spell disaster. "Evasive maneuvers," she ordered, "and activate the point defense systems. We need to intercept those missiles." The ship's engines roared as it maneuvered through space, dodging and weaving to avoid the incoming missiles. The point defense systems fired rapidly, intercepting some of the missiles but allowing a few to slip through. The Elysium shook violently as the missiles struck, the ship's shields flaring before collapsing under the strain. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as systems began to fail. Elena's hands gripped the controls tightly, her mind focused on maintaining their course. "Damage control teams, report to affected areas," Elena shouted, "and keep those missiles off us." Despite their best efforts, the Elysium sustained heavy damage. The flagship was down to its last reserves, its systems struggling to stay online. But Elena refused to relent. They had come too far to stop now. "Concentrate fire on the flagship," Elena commanded, her voice resolute. "We need to end this battle." The Elysium's weapons roared as they unleashed a final, desperate volley at the Council flagship. The enemy vessel was hit repeatedly, its shields failing as the energy beams cut through its hull. The flagship fought back with its remaining strength, but it was clear that the end was near. With a final blinding explosion, the Council flagship erupted in a massive fireball. The shockwave rippled through space, and the remaining Council ships faltered, their formations breaking apart as their command structure was shattered. The enemy fleet began to retreat, their ships fleeing in panic as the humans pressed their advantage. As the battle subsided, Elena allowed herself a moment of relief. The Elysium was heavily damaged, but they had won. The Council had been dealt a decisive blow, and the way was clear for humanity to secure their victory. The crew of the Elysium worked tirelessly to repair the ship and tend to the wounded. Elena stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the stars as the fleet regrouped and prepared for the next phase of their mission. The war was over, but the scars of the battle would remain. "Captain," Harris said, his voice filled with quiet pride, "we did it. We defeated the council. Elena nodded, her expression somber. We won, but it came at a great cost. The price of victory is always high, but we fought for our future. And as long as we hold on to our resolve, we will continue to fight for what we believe in. As the fleet began the process of rebuilding and recovering, Elena reflected on the sacrifices made and the lessons learned. Humanity had faced the ultimate challenge and emerged victorious. They had proven themselves to be a force to be reckoned with, and their resolve had been tested and strengthened. The galaxy was theirs to explore, to shape, and to protect. And with their newfound strength, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had shown the universe the true power of human spirit. Because humanity was not just a species, it was a testament to the power of perseverance and the strength of will. And as long as there were humans left to fight, they would never be defeated. The future was theirs to forge, and they would continue to rise to any challenge that came their way. The end!